All right, Zoroastrianism. Um, I think in terms of adherents of worshippers and believers, this might be the smallest religion that our textbook covers and that this course covers. Um, but it's a fascinating one, and I guess technically it would fall under the banner of monotheism. And as such, it's again, it's like with most of these religions, when you try to get back to their roots. So when did something really begin? You're often again, I think the phrase that I've used in class is like you're kind of walking through the fog of quasi history, and this is no different. But by tradition, Zoroastrianism took its name from and began with the prophet Zoroaster, who by tradition lived about 3,500 years ago. And Zoroastrianism it made a mark. It was a very important part of kind of ancient Middle Eastern and Mediterranean history. As you can see by the dates I have here, it was the dominant religion of ancient Persia, which again, if you know some of your ancient history, was a massive empire for centuries. And threatened, invaded, the ancient Greeks famously, and had an empire that stretched for hundreds of and thousands of square miles, and was a very dominant cultural force. And its central religious identity was Zoroastrianism, and you can see it had a life of dominance, not to say its existence. I mean, it predates this, but it was at the center of ancient Persian culture for a good 12, 1300 years. You can see this date here. It starts to lose its influence around the year 650 CE 80, which is right around the time that we see the spread of Islam. And that's not a coincidence. Even today, the heart of what was once the Persian Empire is Iran today. And so Iran today is a Islamic republic, so to speak, run by the mullahs of Shiite Islam, which we'll be talking about very soon. And there are still Zoroastrians. There is kind of a small core Zoroastrian community in Iran today, but it is embattled because of the Islamic dominance of that country. More on that later. So, like I said, one of the world's smallest religions, we estimate about 200,000 practitioners of Zoroastrianism today. Most of them actually today are in India. Um, the population of Zoroastrians in Iran, its homeland, is dwindling, is very small. But about half of the practitioners you would find in India today, and the rest kind of scattered throughout the world. And there are Zoroastrians in America. Again, in America, you can find adherents of almost all the religions we're talking about. But there is a kind of a Persian, Iranian, Zoroastrian community, particularly on the West Coast in Southern California. Um, its monotheism is rooted in this belief in kind of maybe not so much one god. It kind of depends on how you understand their mythological traditions, but one supreme god, certainly, Ahura Mazda, which in ancient Persia translates to something like wise lord, and he's the chief creator deity, roughly a correlative with kind of God the Father in Judaism and in Christianity. And so the tradition is, in some ways, it sounds a lot like ancient Judaism or even early Islam, and that a prophet is chosen. In this case, Zoroaster is chosen by the deity, and Ahura Mazda speaks through the prophet to introduce his truth to humanity. One striking thing that you find in Zoroastrianism, and that you also find elements, of course, in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as well, is a kind of dualism. The story that the world, you can understand the physical and spiritual heart of the world as a struggle between good and evil. It's a dualistic struggle between the forces of good versus the forces of evil. And as we've seen, that's a very non-Eastern way of viewing the world or the universe or the spiritual realm. As we saw that in Eastern religions, it's much more about not necessarily good versus evil, but it's about balance. You can't understand light without dark. You can't understand life without death. And it's not that one is good and the other is bad. You need them to define each other. And the key is to find the still point between them rather than decide with one over the other. This is a very different kind of aspect. It takes on a very kind of clear division of morality. There are forces of good and there are forces of destruction. Um, one of the kind of the ongoing debates in, in kind of religious studies is, to what degree did the Zoroastrians influence religions like Judaism, like Christianity, or even Islam? When Muslims came into contact with the Zoroastrianism, so they expanded out of the Arabian Peninsula up into the area of what we would call Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan. Did they encounter Zoroastrian ideas that kind of filtered and soaked into their own kind of burgeoning religion? We don't really know. I mean, it is striking the overlap that we do see with Zoroastrianism, with Judaism. Was Judaism influenced by this kind of this dualism, this idea of a kind of a father creator deity, or did Judaism influence Zoroastrian? Live question. In terms of symbolism, this is kind of the key Zoroastrian symbol right here, the Faravahar, which roughly again translates into ancient Persian as divine glory, or wise soul, or something like that. And you'll see that the figure that's depicted in the symbol here wears kind of tradition, kind of ancient Persian garb. You have kind of the long pointy beard, kind of the box type hat. And so it's very much, even today as it is still practiced, it is rooted in deep ancient tradition. And so the practitioners, the priests, for lack of a better term, of Zoroastrianism, wear clothes and dress in a style that reflects these ancient roots. You'll see that the figure here has a one hand kind of turned up and open, and in a kind of symbol of blessing, of obedience, of openness towards Ahura Mazda, the chief deity. In his left hand, he's holding a ring, which may represent kind of loyalty and faithfulness or perfection. We've seen how the circle is a common symbol in so many religions and cultures around the world as a divine, inherently divine shape. And even too, we have the center circle here representing the world, eternity, the unbrokenness of a circle that doesn't have a beginning or an end, the eternal significance of human actions. We'll see that a common kind of core principle in Zoroastrianism is this three-part thing: good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, which are thought to be represented by the three levels of the feathers here on the wings extending in the Fahavahar here. And as the good thoughts, good words, good deeds is a way of kind of centering your life and centering yourself in every moment. A couple of examples here. Here's again, they all tend to be fairly consistent. This one is a kind of a blue Fahavahar in a kind of mosaic tile here, and here you can see even the script down here is a combination of ancient Persian but also Arabic. Here's a very ancient one on the remains of one of what we call a Zoroastrian fire temple. There you can see the open hand, the two rings, the three. Well, this actually looks like there's 4 layers of feathers on this one, but the traditional garb and the box hat, they tend to be very consistent, as you would expect in a religion that is deeply rooted in tradition. The temples, the sacred place of Zoroastrianism is the so-called fire temple. And they tend to be fairly simple buildings. There's a kind of a meeting room in which there might be a kind of homily or teaching on behalf of the priest or the teacher, and then there's a back room where you have the sacred fire. And here's this cartoon over here. This is often used as kind of a symbol of Zoroastrianism in addition to the winged Fahavahar that we just looked at. And this is a fire, an eternal flame that never goes out. And so the flame is not something that Zoroastrians worship, but it represents, again, kind of the mysteriousness and the untouchability, the purification aspect, the power aspect, the dangerous aspect of deity. And so fire is kind of constantly changing, imbued with mystery as a symbol of kind of their mysterious notion of divinity, is a very powerful. Here you see a Zoroastrian fire temple, an ancient one. I believe this one is from Iran. Here too, there are some that are still functioning here, and you can see in this kind of this 4-sided box-like structure, we have what's called a hagiary, a sacred building, where the flame is being kept, and other flames at the top of the building and over here as well. Here's a modern Zoroastrian fire temple, and here you see a number of male Zoroastrian practitioners, priests here, in the traditional garb, the white robes and hat and mask here, here charged with tending to the sacred eternal flame in the back part of a temple. Here's I believe this is a Zoroastrian. Shoot, I'm forgetting where this one is. It's either in Iran or this is the one in Southern California. But this is again fairly typical. There you see the Fahavahar above that. You can see almost kind of a classical element to it with the arch and the columns, a kind of a mixture of almost Islamic architecture and design and art and Mediterranean Greek and Roman, perhaps we can see the kind of the elevated platform as well kind of ties into that. And you see this reflecting pond in front is very common in modern fire temples, again a symbol of eternity, of the power of the god, the water symbolizing purity and purification. Here. This guy, I forget which kind of famous mathematician he's supposed to be, but he gives him the face. This is Michelangelo down here, who was actually painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel at the very same time that Raphael was painting this picture. And Raphael just, again, he kind of, not so humbly kind of puts himself in this gathering of greatness, but as you'll see, he puts himself way off to the side. But it's striking that he puts him right next to Zoroaster, and I wonder if that has any meaning, if Raphael had a particular love or interest in Zoroaster in a way that he even almost wanted to associate himself with the prophet. I don't know. I'm sure there might be an answer to that out there, but I'm not exactly sure. Zoroastrians today in Iran, a really small amount remain, only about 11,000, and it's quite a tragic story. And so, since 1979, Iran has been an Islamic republic and run by the Ayatollahs. There was the Islamic Revolution in 1979, where the Shah of Iran was kicked out, and this kind of hardcore fundamentalist Shiite Islamic government took over, and they have been in power for the last 40 plus years. And under this kind of fundamentalist government, all other religions are at best false, and at worst are infidels and deserving of ostracism and punishment. And so the Zoroastrian community, which has been there, for almost 3,000, more than 3,000 years, remains a small but embattled and persecuted one. It kind of goes through waves in Iran, but and it's hard to kind of know numbers too, because Iran is very much kind of a black box to the outside Western world. But by and large, yes, Zoroastrians within from the Islamic point of view, the Shiite point of view, are infidels. Like I said at the beginning of this presentation, the largest group of Zoroastrians in the world lives in India, near the city of Mumbai, about 100,000 of them. And they tend to be amongst the wealthiest and most educated of groupings in India, kind of like the Sikhs too. We'll see the Sikhs. Most Sikhs that are on the face of the earth today are in a particular region of India, and they also tend to be compared with the mass of Indian population, which is about 1 billion people these days. Also comparatively wealthy and highly educated. Zoroastrians too. So it's not the numbers of Zoroastrians are somewhat stable, we might say. A latest study suggested that it maybe have been growing somewhat. I mean, it is a religion that technically one could convert into, that tends to be very rare. More by and large, Zoroastrians around the world tend to frown on conversion, and do see it almost like with Shinto or indigenous cultures, that you only can be a part of them if you are ethnically, racially, culturally already a part of them. And so you tend to be a Zoroastrian by birth, as it were. There are instances of conversion and Zoroastrians marrying people from other religions, but it tends to be frowned upon. And so that doesn't bode well for its ultimate survival, unless those core groups have lots of children. It tends to be these ideas that don't suggest that it's going to be an expanded anytime soon. All right, I end with a nice trivia question here. What classic rock singer, was raised in a Zoroastrian household? Do you know? Do you have any idea? He's sometimes considered to be, by many people's opinions, to be the greatest pop rock singer of all time. Do you give up? It is Freddie Mercury. Was actually raised Zoroastrian, although I don't think it's something that he necessarily followed throughout his life. He was born Farrokh Bulsara to a Zoroastrian Persian household, but of course better known by his famous stage name Freddie Mercury. In fact, if you've seen the film Bohemian Rhapsody, which is the kind of the story of the band Queen, it's very much the story of Freddie Mercury. There's a scene where he goes home, and his parents are very worried about kind of the path that Freddie is taking. And his father says something to him, like, never forget, good thoughts, good words, good deeds. So the film never really kind of makes it obvious and telegraphs that their son is Zoroastrian, or that they're Zoroastrian, but it's that little phrase that gives it away. All right, so much for Zoroastrianism. See you next time.